Today we're going to be talking about rearranging formulas. So today we're going to look at rearranging formulas that involve one step. So rearranging a formula is just like rearranging an equation to solve it, except instead of having numbers, we have letters. So we're going to do some side-by-sides. We're going to try solving an equation first that involves that operation, and then we're going to try doing the same thing where it's a formula without numbers. So my first one here says solve x plus 5 equals 20. Now we have been solving equations for a long time. In order to solve for x, I want to find a way to cancel out that plus 5. So I would do the opposite and I would subtract 5. And what you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. So I would subtract 5 from both sides. That's going to leave me with x on this side. And then 20 take away 5 is 15. So this is just x equals 15. On the other side, it says rearrange to isolate x. Isolate means get x by itself. So we want to try to rearrange this so that x is all by itself. Now, when I am rearranging formulas, I do like to highlight the letter that we are trying to isolate. It helps me keep an eye on what it is that I'm supposed to be getting by itself. So I have x plus a equals b. So we're trying to get the x by itself, and then I focus on the operation here. We are adding a, so if I want to get that a gone, I would do the opposite and subtract a. Just like here we subtracted 5, here I am going to subtract an a. So I'm going to get x equals, now b and a are not like terms. To be like terms, they need to have the same variable or letter part, which these do not. So I'm just going to leave it as b minus a. And that's it. I've isolated the x's by itself, so x equals b take away a. That's my rearranged formula. Now we're going to try the next one. So I have x minus 7 equals 3. We're trying to solve for x. To cancel out that minus 7, I'm going to do the opposite and add 7 to both sides. So I get x equals 3 plus 7 gives me 10. Now when I go to rearrange the formula to isolate for x, it's pretty much the same thing we just did, except we don't have numbers. So I have x minus a equals b. I'm trying to get the x by itself. I notice that we are subtracting a, so I would add a to cancel it out, and what I do to one side, we do to the other side. So I'm going to get x equals, b and a, once again, are not like terms, so it's just b plus a. So it's going to be x equals b plus a. All right, if I take a look at my next one, I have 7x equals 28, and we are solving. So if I want to solve for x, I'm going to try to cancel out that multiply by 7 by dividing both sides by 7. So I get x equals 28 divided by 7 is 4. So x equals 4. Now on my formula side, I have ax equals b. We are trying to isolate for x, which means we want to try to find a way to get that a to the other side. So we are currently multiplying by a. That's what it means when you have the two letters side by side. So I would cancel it out by dividing by a, and what I do to one side, I do to the other. Now I have two choices on how I can write this answer. I could write x equals b and then divided by a, like that. And I'm going to be honest, that's not how I usually write my answer. I prefer to write it as fraction and do b divided by a, where it's the vertical division, so it's b over a. So x equals b divided by a. But either one of these is correct. You'll just notice that I tend to write it as a fraction instead of writing it with the division sign like that. All right, my next one, I have x divided by 2 equals 10. So we are trying to solve for x. I am currently dividing by 2, so I'm going to do the opposite and multiply by 2. You could also put that 10 over a 1 and then cross multiply if you want to do that. So this means we're going to get x equals 10 times 2, which is 20. When we do the formula, it's the same thing. I'm trying to isolate for x. So I'm dividing by a. I'm going to try to cancel that out by multiplying both sides by a. So I get x equals, and you can write it as b times a. I wouldn't really recommend that because that times sign looks like an x. You could write x equals b bracket a to show the multiplication. That's okay. You could write it with b dot a. Or when you are multiplying two variables together, you could just write that it's BA, or I like to go alphabetical order and just say that it's AB. So most of the time I probably will write it with the bracket, but you don't actually need the bracket. You could just write x equals AB or BA. You can write it as B dot A or A dot B. It doesn't matter what order we do them in, just to show that there's multiplication. All right, and my last one, I have x squared equals 25. So to cancel out a square, we would do the opposite, which is a square root. And what we do to one side, we do to the other. Now the square root of 25 is 5. So that means x equals 5. Now my other one, x squared equals a, we are trying to isolate x. And the operation we have here is a square. So to cancel out a square, I would square root. Now the only problem is that I can't actually square root a because I don't know what it is. So I'm just going to leave it as the square root of a. So x would equal the square root of a. So the only difference when you are rearranging a formula from solving an equation is that you don't have a number. So we still cancel out addition with subtraction, we cancel out subtraction with addition, we cancel out multiplication with division and division with multiplication, and we cancel out squares with square roots. So it's still the same thing you would do if you had numbers, you just can't actually work it out. That's the only difference. So we do have two last examples at the bottom. It says rearrange to isolate n. So my first example here says a equals n minus bc. So the letter that I am trying to rearrange for is n. Now, I'm going to be honest, people do better rearranging this if the letter you're trying to isolate is on the left-hand side of the equation. So I would start this by just flipping this equation over. You don't have to, but I will when I'm doing this because it actually seems to work better for most people. So I'm going to do n minus bc equals a. So I didn't change the order, I just traded the two sides. And I am still trying to isolate n. So I notice there's a b and there's a c, that they're being multiplied together, but I actually don't care about that part. All I really care about is the operation in relation to n. So I notice that there is a subtraction. So we're doing n take away bc. So if I want to get rid of a subtract bc, I would do the opposite and I would add bc to both sides. So even though there is multiplication, I'm not doing any division. All I'm doing is I'm looking at the letter that we're trying to isolate and then what operation is it doing with that letter. And we are subtracting. So we're going to do the opposite and add. So I get n equals a and bc, not like terms. So it's just a plus bc. Okay, we're going to try one more like that. This one says rearrange to isolate for n. This is where my n is. It is already on the left-hand side, so I'm going to leave the equation. I'm not going to flip it over. So I notice that there's a 2, an m, and an n. And I am interested in what relationship the 2m has with the n, because we're trying to get n by itself. So I notice that we are multiplying n by 2 and m. So we are currently multiplying by 2 and multiplying by m. So I can divide separately by 2 and m, or I could divide just by 2m, which is what I'm going to do. Okay, so we're going to get that n, I'm going to start a new line here, equals p plus r Now, I'm going to be honest, I like to do the fractions, so divided by, and it is the whole thing. You are dividing both P and R by 2m. So I could write it like that it's P plus R, the whole thing, divided by 2m. Or if you want to, you can say n equals P plus R, and then do the divided by 2m here. But if you want to write it like this, you absolutely have to put brackets around the P plus R to show that we are dividing by both P and R, sorry, that we're dividing P and R by 2m. And you actually technically also need to put a bracket around the 2m to show that the 2 and the m are together. So I find it much easier to just write it as a fraction, and then I don't have to worry about brackets. But if you want to write it all in one line, you have to put brackets around the P plus R to show that that part's together, and the 2m to show that that's what we're dividing by. Okay, so that's it for rearranging formulas for today. Go and try your practice questions.